Hi guy, welcome to the AMIGArama podcast. I'm your host Lorfarius, and in this week's show we are going to be taking a look at Midnight Resistance. I just want to take a moment to send out a huge thank you to Dan from Lemon Tube Amiga. As always, he stepped up and helped out with the 2-player footage, and I'll drop that into the show notes. Now for this week's news, let's just do something a little bit different. I've really been getting into Amiga music of late, especially the whole mod scene, and I've been listening to lots of different music demos and downloading some ADFs to try through emulators and even watching some stuff on YouTube. I've enjoyed that immensely. I've found all sort of things to listen to. I'm not very musically minded, though I am intrigued about perhaps creating some music over on my Amiga. I have no idea what I'm doing though, so if anybody wants to help out or can recommend some software, something like that, you can drop me a line on Twitter or pop along to the Facebook page. One thing I did discover, which was released late last year, is an Alex Menchie music demo disc, which was created by Fanatic 2K. Now the whole thing is 30 minutes long, which is a lot of music. It's in ADF format, and you can watch the full thing in YouTube. It's got some really good sampled musics and some awesome beats bopping along there, and I've been listening to it on and off now for several weeks. It's really good stuff, and I just wanted to post a link to it in the show notes because I'm sure you guys will enjoy it too. I was also having a look at Abime the other day, which is abime.net. I hope I pronounced that right. When I noticed someone had just released this really interesting Pro Tracker software, I'll just read some of the blurb. PT1210 Mark I is a Pro Tracker digital turntable. That is a computer program that will let you play your Amiga Pro Tracker module files, .mod files to everyone else, as if you're playing with actual CDJ turntables. It will run on your Commodore Amiga and turns it into the ultimate tool for you to play live at shows and DJ sets. I think that's the sort of thing Ravi gets up to on the Retro Hour podcast. He's done a lot of Amiga DJ shows. Would be interesting to hear if this is actually any use to someone like that. Now let's carry on. It says, don't worry about how old your machine is. Program fully in 68K assembler, PT1210 runs even in the most humble Amiga setups. We are people who love the Amiga, love Pro Tracker, and love DJing and live electronic music. Up until this point, there was no real Amiga tool aimed at live performance that DJs and musicians could use in any kind of live setting. Now this does sound amazing, and I'm half tempted to have a crack at it myself. I'll stick a link into the description, but if anyone uses this or has any sort of experience with it, by all means pop over to the Facebook page and just let me know how it went, or just how good it is, or even if you've used it for more than just how it's described. Anyway, that's it for news. Let's move over to the main part of this week's show. During the 1980s, my computer of choice, or rather the one that was chosen for me, was a ZX Spectrum Plus 2. and I do remember that one of the huge games that I saw for that system at the time was Midnight Resistance. Now, I never got to play this on any other system. The Plus 2 had the extra 128k, I think, and Midnight Resistance was one of the few games that actually used it to its full benefit, I believe. There are some sort of extra features for it, and I remember actually buying it because of these, and I can actually remember having my hands on the box and being very excited to play it. And at least I think it was the 128 thing that set me off. It might have been something else. Anyway, I was very, very excited by this because it got massive scores, unlike anything else at the time. So to come to this today, to look at an Amiga version and think, oh, I wonder if this one holds up. Well, we are about to find out. The game was published by Ocean Software. They did things like Batman the movie, a very, very amazing game. All the Chase HQs, I think there was only 2 of those. Eco, I don't know what that is. Hook, Hudson Hawk, that's a very famous one, I think it's awful. Kid Chaos, Narc, all the RoboCop games. Again, this is Ocean, so they were absolutely massive. Now, the developer behind the game was a company called Special FX. They were responsible for Batman the Caped Crusader, which is a strange sort of comic book version of the actual Batman games. You actually get to see it flick over through panels. I have actually played that on the Spectrum, but I don't think I actually liked it, though I'm sure it's a lot of people's favourite game, so we won't go too deep into that one. Is there even an Amiga version? I think there isn't. Yeah, sorry, of course there must be, because that's what I always tend to look at. Anyway, they also did Hudson Hawk, Red Heat, I think that's the movie, isn't it? The Arnie movie. RoboCop 2 and Untouchables. Oh, no, that's one I do want to touch at some point. Oh my god. It came out in 1990 and was on just one floppy disk. It was a 2-player game priced at £24.99. Typical price for Amiga games back then. Now, the coder behind this one was Ian Moran. He worked on Hudson Hawk, RoboCop 2, Striker and Untouchables. Typical range of games there, nothing too amazing that jumps out, does it? Graphics wise, it was Colin Rushby, who also worked on Arena, Barbarian, I think that's the original Fighting Barbarian, Hudson Hawk again, RoboCop 2 and Terrapods. Isn't that a Psygnosis game? I'm not sure. Also on the graphics was Karen Davis. She did Hudson Hawk, Red Heat, RoboCop 2, Striker and Untouchables. Big chunk of licensed games there. Now the music was done by Keith Tinman, who also worked on Batman the Caped Crusader, Head Over Heels. Oh, that has an Amiga version. I'm definitely going to have a look at that. Hook, which actually, come to think about it, I'm thinking the Mega Drive version. I think this is a graphic adventure. Hudson Hawk, One Step Beyond, Parasol Stars, I think that's one of the sequels to Rainbow Islands, maybe. Pushover, oh, we did cover that a very long time ago. Red Heat, RoboCop 2 and Untouchables. Wasn't that a good film? Every time I say the name of this game, I have that music from it, the main theme, dinging away in the back of my head. Don't panic, guys, don't turn off. I'm not going to start humming or singing away. Let's have a look at some of the development notes for Midnight Resistance. Now, it was originally created and directed by Koji Akibayashi. Again, I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. He directed and developed it completely in its entirety for the arcade. To make this one stand out, it was completely different to what had come before. They used a spinning sort of rotary joystick system which would turn as you twist the sticks, which gave it very different sort of controls to the likes of, say, Contra, which would just your typical stick and firing buttons away. Now, this was a Data East arcade game, and it's often lauded for being extremely highly detailed with its backgrounds, especially compared to other games at the time from that genre, and I'm quite happy to say that does come across in the Amiga port. The Amiga version is also the only port to actually offer multiplayer, which you can play over on Amiga Live. Now, the Amiga port was actually in development for a grand total of 5.5 months. Although it was coded at the same time as the Atari ST version, neither actually share any sort of code and were developed completely from scratch, so they're effectively different games by different people. During development of the actual Amiga port, they used something called the Suitcase, which was used to play and actually record footage from the actual arcade machine. They didn't actually send them over an arcade, they sent them this portable box. I think you could plug that into a TV, which you could then record footage from. It's very different to the sort of thing that you would get today. They'd probably pump out sort of like sprite collections and artwork and stuff like that. No, back then you really had to get your hands dirty and play the actual games from start to finish and then record everything over onto, well, it would have been VHS, wouldn't it? Ruddy hell, that would have been bad. The game in turn was then built up completely from scratch to match what was actually in the VHS footage that they'd taken. During development, they did actually add cheats to the game, not to help the players when they were at home, because it is quite a difficult game, but to actually go to different points, get through different parts and test it out and get it working. A lot of times it was a mixed bag with developers doing this sort of thing. Some just did it as a little bonus and treat for people. A lot of time they just did it for actual bug testing and try to find problems with the game before they actually released them. A few interesting tidbits I found out about the game, especially with the port. Enemies on the screen are actually triggered by map points or events that actually happen. So it's possible to not be flooded by enemies and explore very slowly if you take a few steps at a time. They're not all just going to flood the screen at once. You have to wait for these triggers effectively for them to step out. I think something like Contra is very different to that. The screen is always being hit by a constant flow of enemies, or am I going a bit off there? I'm not sure. It seems that all of the enemies were actually coded with simple, low-level instructions. So basically let's head in a certain direction, move over objects, etc, etc. Except for the actual level guardians or bosses, if you want to call them that, who all have unique movement patterns on screen, which effectively makes them like your typical on-stage bosses. For the Amiga port, they did make a few other changes. Originally, the main villain for the game was called King Crimson, and he was renamed to the Commissar in Ocean's Port, though it's a very paper-thin plot which actually plays out, which doesn't really make any difference. I'm not entirely sure why they've done it, but it was their game, they were going to have some fun with it, so yeah. One thing I did realise, especially as I was reading all these different reviews about the game, it seems that the Amiga port is often proclaimed to be much better than the actual arcade game. Ocean just didn't do a straight port on this, they really did program this from scratch up. They tried to match what was in the arcade game, and they really went out of the way to make it much better, I suppose, and a different sort of game. But I guess that's up to you guys to decide. Now, originally this was ported to the Amstrad CPC, Atari ST and the E, Commodore 64, ZX Spectrum of course, which is what I'm very familiar with, Sega Mega Drive or Genesis, take your pick there. And it seems that this was also Data East's very first ever Sega Mega Drive game. Let's jump into the game's story. A ruthless commissar, leader of a vicious regime of megalomaniacs, has kidnapped your family, including your grandfather, a world-famous scientist, in a desperate bid for dictatorial power over the Earth. Can you rescue your relatives before the evil commissar forces your grandfather to use his superior weaponry research in order to enforce his own tyranny throughout the planet? Pit your wits against an obsessive army, their tortuous traps, and a convoy of menacing machinery. Yeah, I did say it was a bit brief. That's pretty much all that you end up with. Now, we will have to take a moment just to have a talk about the initial load screen from this, because it's taken from the cover box artwork. Now, I have to say this because it really is a thing of beauty. Now, you've got your hero stood there, diving in from the side with a flamethrower and an enemy on fire behind him, so he's obviously just lit him up a few moments to go. There's also lots of enemies all dotted around. It's very science fiction-y, and you can actually see player 2 off to the background. You know, it's worth mentioning as I think it's one of the best initial load screens that I've actually seen so far on the Amiga. It's glorious, and I think I'm going to end up using this as my desktop background for some time to come. Once you've got past this, you effectively start the game next to a jeep driving through a cityscape on this weird overhead road. It always reminds me of Tokyo. Now you can jump on board the jeep and let the driver take everyone out as it's running along, or you can even run in front, scramble around like crazy Rambo style, taking everybody out. Every time you shoot someone there, you drop some keys and you get points, that sort of thing. Now yes, the hero does have a Rambo style sweatband tied around his head, and it is flapping briefly in the wind. It does look pretty cool. The main character is a typical soldier, but he's also wearing a t-shirt. There's no vest in sight. He's got a very large sprite. It's quite large, I thought, for the screen. He's also carrying a gun, of course. Now, this doesn't actually change appearance throughout the game, even if you get different weapons. Along the bottom of the screen, you've got things like live shown, which is showing his hearts, a number of keys, to a total of 6. With your ammo and score. This is also divided in two, so one side for player 1, the other side for player 2. They both stay visible even if it's only one person playing. The graphics and the gameplay are strongly reminiscent of Contra. You even get a similar feel in weight and movement, the way the character runs around the screen, jumps and shoots, that sort of thing. It feels very, very close to it, and it's a very similar style. You also begin with 2 lives and 5 continues, but you can earn more the usual way by upgrading points and getting them from the little stores in between the stages. Now the controls are very fast and fluid, as you would expect for this type of a game. They do sort of try to replicate the rotary system that's in the arcade. It comes across very strange though, and to use it you have to hold down fire, then turn the joystick, which circles the weapon at the same time as you're moving. It's very complicated to explain. I found it a bit too fiddly, to be honest, and I also felt it was better just to run and gun as you're jumping around. There are parts where you're crawling through small spaces and moving left and right, where you can move the gun around and aim and stuff, which can be quite handy, but a lot of the time you're just out there in the open running and gunning like crazy. It's definitely one that'll come down to a personal preference. Also, pressing space will fire whatever weapons in your actual backpack. Or items, sorry. Now, the point of the game is just simply to survive and collect keys, where at the end of each stage you can spend what you've collected on weapons or upgrades. Now, you get things there like full automatic fire, three-way shots, a shotgun itself, a flamethrower, which is probably my favourite weapon in the game, just because you can sling out this big line of fire and swing it around, bullet refills, shields, a spinning barrier, or a nitro. It sounds very, very similar to what you get in Contra. It's very, very close. All of them are nice and simple. They react in different but obvious ways, so you don't really need me to explain everything. Though I must add, they all do have limited ammo or uses, and if you get hit just once, you will actually drop the weapon. Now luckily, this is a bit annoying to be honest, you can run back and pick it back up, and it really does keep you on your toes and make you want to keep avoiding the shots that are coming towards you. All 7 stages are taken from the arcade, but they do change as you go along, so they don't feel too restrictive. It's not your simple left and right. There's up and down, and there's pipes and tunnels and fancy bits. Being on the floor of, say, a forest when you start one level, by the end you might be up in the trees with the eagles. There really is a load of level variety, and it comes across very well. Now there's also a big action boss for every stage, and some of them can be quite the surprise. I don't want to spoil them and start listing them out, as they're all worth seeing, but the jet, which I will spoil, is probably my favourite one, especially because it reminds me of something of a Total Recall. There isn't much of a learning curve. The game is quite difficult, though luckily the first level sort of serves as a training tutorial. Now throughout the game I'm sad to say that there's not much music, though there is this fantastic track which plays throughout the game. It seems to be quite long, and sadly it is on a bit of a loop, though it does have its quieter moments, so you don't always notice that it's the same tune, though I would have preferred obviously to have a lot more stuck in there. Now you do get to toggle the music on or off, though sadly it's a choice. If the music's on, there's no sound effects. If the sound effects are on, there's no music. It's very strange that you can't have both together. I suspect it's down to the limitations of hardware, or they just can't program it in time. The FX though, they're not really anything special. They're just pings and bongs and explosions, the usual stuff. You're not going to miss them, and I actually found it more fun and certainly more intense to have the music playing in the background, especially when you get to things like bosses, because it's just a lot more fun. Though it's time to have a look at some of the game's problems. Now the first up, and I felt this was quite a major one, the game is just way too dark. Now at first when I was playing this, I thought that my TV was having issues, and I even tried it again on the emulator and it's exactly the same thing. But a lot of the magazines from the time actually complained about the same issue. I was doing some research on it later, and running a standard copy of this game is just very, very annoying. You know, it's very hard to see what's going on the screen. I don't know why they've done that. It's the colours, it's very, very dark, it's the palette of it all. Now luckily the WHD Load Edition actually has an option when you boot it up which gives you double brightness mode, which fixes it completely. You know, it just disappears. So by all means, if you want to play this game and you sound excited by it, don't just go for the standard Amiga copy. I'd recommend it on an emulator or get some sort of patched ADF version from somewhere. I'm sure it's doable. It's a very weird issue for a game to actually have, and I can't say I've ever seen this on anything else, and I'm not sure why it even got out of the factory, so to speak, like this. It's very, very strange. Next up is the lack of story. As you heard when I read it out, there just isn't anything there. Now I know they said Ocean were going to write their own version and come up with something fancy, and that's the best they could do. They might as well bother to just put, I don't know why they didn't just use the original after all. It was probably even shorter than that. Another problem I discovered as I was doing extensive playthroughs and trying to get really far is that the music would just sometimes turn off completely. Now I tried this on a floppy disk version as well, and it happened there too. You know, you can fix this by pausing the game and pressing something on the keyboard, you know, to reactivate the sound, like flick between the effects or the music, and it sorts it though. Very annoying, and I don't know why it does it. It just happens at the weirdest point. You know, you're in the middle of the action, there's a lot going on, it goes quiet and disappears, and then it never comes back, and you could effectively play the rest of the level in absolute silence, and I don't know what happened there. Maybe it's just a bug in the version I was playing, though I suspect it's going to affect everybody else. I also didn't like the way that you can't have the music and the sound effects on at the same time. It's a bit of a drag, and it's annoying more than anything. Though I do get this is a shooter, and a lot of the time your concentration is all over the place because, you know, there's so much going on screen at once. It would have been nice though just to have that music and effect firing away at the same time. It would have been pretty good together. Now the reason this game is so difficult is because it's a one-hit kill. Now this can be extremely difficult at times with bullets literally like littering the entire screen, so it can be very frustrating without any sort of energy bars, and some of these bullets are quite slow and some of them are fast, so you're having to duck and dodge and weave and move your way out, and the controls are great and a lot of time you can survive that. Though when you obviously get hit, you drop your weapon, you have to run, so you get killed and the weapon falls on the floor. You can go back to get it, which is fine, though it would have been great if there was just that other opportunity to have a bit of a knockback and not just die outright every single time. Maybe I just want an easy mode in the game, though I will say the deaths do actually tend to be quite fair, and you can often see it coming. It's very rarely down to the game, it's usually down to your fault. Let's have a look at the magazine scores. First up was Amiga Action, 85%. Amiga Format, 69%. My god, they really didn't like this. It's not that bad. Amiga Power, 84%. That's more like it. CU Amiga, 89%. And The One at 81%. That's a very good range of scores, and I'm happy to say that they also kept the scores for the budget re-release a year or two later, which is always a good sign of having a very good game. As an Amiga game, this does have quite the reputation compared to the original arcade port. It's often stated as being a much better game. having played both, I can say that I had way more fun with the Amiga port. This is a pure Contra ripoff, but damn, it just does it so well. It really is a grade A quality for this genre of game. I had loads and loads of fun with it. It's got action, bullets, weapons, speed. It has it all that an action game needs. Not forgetting the pure crazy bosses. It really does feel like something out of a Schwarzenegger film. I saw bits of Commando thrown in there, True Lies again, like with the jet. Now, this might not have been intentional, but nailed that action movie feel. Now, you shouldn't expect much of the story, I suppose, and there isn't really anything to keep you going through the game. Again, this is an action game. Do you want a story? Though a bit of humour thrown in, they have done it with other titles. Something extra just to blow the world up. It would have just been the icing on the cake. I want to have a bit of entertainment whilst I'm going through these games, especially if it's something really hard like this, because you're going to be playing it constantly. You want some jokey references in there. You want a bit of having a laugh or a bit of humour, or maybe some play off the second player that's sort of involved in the story, I suppose. When I first started playing the game, the controls did feel a bit off, though it really didn't take me very long to get used to them. They are trying to replicate that arcade experience, and for the most part they do get it, though if you don't like that, you can just ignore it and start running and gunning and running around like crazy. The choice is yours, which is another thing that I absolutely love about it. Now, arcade ports, I usually hit or miss, and Ocean have done plenty of lazy ones, but here they really have achieved something special. I can understand all the praise that it's been getting. This can be quite a difficult game in a lot of places, though there's lots and lots of cheats out there, so it's not very difficult to find some to work your way through. I think even the WHD load version had plenty of cheats as options to load when you go into it. It is well worth a go though, and I'd recommend that everyone picks a copy up. This is a pure arcade Amiga classic. Plus, don't forget it has that very good 2-player mode over on Amiga Live. I'm sorry to say that yet another show draws to a close. If you'd like to leave any comments, you can do so over on the Facebook page, which is facebook.com/AMIGArama. Follow me on Twitter, which is @AMIGAramaPod. And let's just take a moment to thank our Patreon supporters. They are Adam Bradley, Darren Coles, Figgy CTZ, Graham Vebke, Glenn Milford from Casual Retro Gamer Weekly, Jason Warnes, O'Brien's Retro and Vintage, Retro Ravi, Richard Legg, Sneff and Treble. If you'd like to help the show out, you can do so over at patreon.com/AMIGArama. Not forgetting that, depending on the level, I also post next week's show a whole week early, but that's only for Patreon supporters, which I think is a nice little bonus. Anyway, until next time, guys.